So, okay, we're moving on to the next um, session. It's system migration lifecycle, and we are joined. We will be joined by Nitish Agarwal. I don't know. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly. Agarwal. And Nitish, thank you. So glad to meet you, to have you here. We're very interested in hearing what you have to say. And please begin by introducing yourself briefly, and then proceed to your presentation, if you please.
All right, no, thank you so much, Mariana. Yeah, the second time was great. Actually, it's Nitish Agarwal. So, hey everyone. Um, yeah, I am Nitish Agarwal here, presenting on the topic of system migration life cycle, or I kind of elaborated a bit to kind of give more context in terms of system migration or consolidation, which is made more manageable with APIs, right? It's an API conference. API Days team has done a lot of efforts. It's a great team behind the scenes, have given us made this opportunity. So thank you, folks, again. Uh, so I'm coming all the way from India to you, talking about system migrations. One thing I do want to note upfront is this talk has nothing to do with GoDaddy. I do work there as a principal engineer, but this is mostly my personal experience building systems and learning from them and doing tons of migration in the process. All right, so I hope the slides are visible to everyone, right? So let's talk about business life cycle. I think everyone would have seen this graph at some point in time. If not, let me give you a 2-minute MBA on it. It's every company goes through this cycle where you have an introduction to the market. Then the business goes through finding a product market fit. If they do find it, then they hit a hockey stick part of the curve, which is growing rapidly, having more competition in the picture, uh, over time maturing, streamlining their processes, minimizing costs, and essentially making the business more efficient and profit making. Right. Uh, I think any of the bigger tech companies in that way, which have like a good oiled machine working for them. So what we try to not talk about or absolutely not think about is the decline stage, or where your competition outpaces you or you kind of fade away in that matter. So that's where companies start looking for a life cycle extension, and they look at two possible promises in that matter, right? What you would see is mergers and acquisitions being talked about a lot. You'll see all sort of mergers happening where like Salesforce acquiring Tableau, Twitch being acquired by Amazon. So those are all like acquisitions where a smaller company is being acquired by a bigger company to give like a whole bigger sum where you are provided with more services from a single company. Or you might have two like for like companies and they might just merge to be like a more efficient business, right? Maybe in some scenarios, like you have any company like ArcelorMittal in a way, right? A steel conglomerate. So that's what people think when they talk about mergers and acquisition. What really starts happening is if you take up acquisitions instead of having like bigger companies coming in place, you have like many smaller companies being run as one single facade of a bigger company, which might not be the prettiest scenario, might not be the most efficient scenario for most, right? And that's backed by much of what has been I think surveyed or researched, talking about like, okay, most studies say that 70 to 90% of these acquisitions fail, right? Uh, so let's take a look. Let's take a look at what happens after an acquisition, right? What is happening? What's going under the hood? What all can happen in that process? So uh, in an acquisition, you can either consolidate bits and pieces. So the whole business was not useful to you. You kind of take what's useful and kind of leave the rest, right? Um, you do big bang consolidations. Those are the fastest of kind, but also can be much more painful, or can in a way make or break parts of the businesses where, like, okay, you acquired a good running company, but it's not gelling well, or vice versa sort of scenario, right? Uh, Jumping into the last one is more of you keep running them as parallel businesses. We saw that fish example where you had like a lot many smaller fishes. It's more like a parallel business, or sorry, a failed business in that scenario, right? Because it's that consolidation pretty much failed for you. Now you're running them to as two separate entities if you are running them at all, right? Okay, so in my experience, what mostly happens is, and the GIF here gives it away, is more of a big bang migration, right? So how does a big bang migration look like for us? It's it's basically multiple teams being rallied for a new Hunger Game announcement of sorts, right? So what's really happening is you take up all the teams which are necessary from your parent company to talk about, and also the company which you recently acquired, to say, hey, we are going to kind of join the two businesses together, like join the two tech stacks, or like have just one tech stack take over whatever you had existing. And that's where that consolidation process kind of starts to happen, right? So the first exercise which you'll see normally happening is feature prioritization. So from basically you'll start from scratch, talk about, hey, what are the most core features for your company, what is the most core feature set for the company which you're migrating or consolidating, and start picking and kind of dumping some, saying, okay, like these are the ones which I need, these we can keep. So take some egg, break some egg sort of scenario, right? And then you actually start talking about the stacks, right? So what I just mentioned about, like, okay, you deep dive into the engineering side of things also. Again, talking more from the engineering front, you start looking at, okay, what are those two parallel stacks running? Is there any commonality between those? What kind of data set or size of data set are we talking about? What kind of ongoing rate that data set have right now with the existing company, right? All right, so I think we are halfway through the slides, and all I've talked about is business lifecycle, right? But hopefully, this from this slide on, you should get a hint of where do APIs start playing a major role for a company. So, issues we run into with the Big Bang migration is the volume of data which is being transferred or migrated is might not be conducive to existing APIs. The existing company might have more of a transactional based system, not lending itself to bulk data imports, right? Or historical data imports in some sense, right? Might have different naming conventions, whatnot. So all these things start coming into play. What you start seeing also is it's not that the company is put to a full stop and you start migrating. You have a moving train sort of scenario where you have lot many teams coming in who are already developing features, but also now have to do an additional uh, item of migrating this existing business, and kind of also answer questions on, okay, hey, how does this API work? Can I use this API for such and such purposes and whatnot, right? Um, that kind of leads to that same point of, like, okay, no single point of contact. We live in a microservices world that essentially is like hundreds of different microservices talking to each other, and that means hundred of different interfaces which you might have to deal with in a way, if not planned. If you have like a API gateway on top, that the situation might be different, but again, all these use cases we have to keep in mind, right? Similar case about authentication. Like there might not be a service to service mechanism which is in play here. It might be all dependent on a service client side jot, right? So all these things have to be taken into consideration. And the same thing is around rate limiting. So how's the API setup? So again, this is I'm trying to kind of balance here about not going into too much detail, but also at the same time, what kind of scenarios you start unfolding as you start diving one or two layer deep into what you're kind of dealing with in terms of bigger migrations, right? So what all this leads to is more of a custom or a tailored solution, but built every time you have to do a migration or a consolidation project for a company, right? So lots of steps being repeated again and again. if you're not careful, what I've seen is like the teams, especially which get involved in these cycles, do come out with some patterns, but are not very visible outside as a whole. If you don't take a couple of steps back and start taking a look at those, right? So that's where again, in a way, coming to Matrix, where what if I start? I told you about approach where we can do big bang migrations, but with less pain and more of a standardized process, right? So you don't have to go through that custom activity every time, and you can minimize, at least from the engineering front, a lot of these activities by having some frameworks of sort around it, right? So let's talk about one of those solutions. So you can start with creating dedicated migration and consolidation teams, right? These are responsible for all infrastructure or shim layers for API, which help in these migration or consolidation activities, right? And upside, of course, for this is now you have a single point of contact, right? So maintenance of core infrastructure is within a single team. Um, all all the efforts which have to happen, the business have to come to a single team which can say like, hey, these are our APIs from a parent system to which you have to connect to. When I say you, it might be a team which is consolidating that data, right? So saying, okay, a team from, let's say, user accounts comes in and says, okay, I do want to send out data. These are all my users. Fair. Like this is our standard open API spec. Go ahead and use it, and accordingly you can transfer data. These are the limits. This is pagination, whatnot. You can kind of talk about all those things, right? The downside, of course, is like the team, depending on how it's structured, can be overwhelmed with number of changes happening, especially in a fast-moving company. So if the parent company is evolving at a very fast pace, and the features are not being prioritized in a way, what you'll see is the team kind of reiterating or like kind of repeating that same cycle of evolving their APIs, which are a facade for these migrations to happen, right? So that's where I talk about this downside of increased functionality and evolving architectures can also play a role there. Okay, now talking about a more traditional approach where it's sort of like you build it, you serve all clients related to it. And what I mean by that is a shared responsibility model where a team create their own APIs, right? So yes, these days team create their own APIs, they manage their own infrastructure, but also start catering to a different type of client, which is uh, not like an external client, but more of an internal client, which might have bulk data needs, right? Or which might have needs which are separate from like how your different applications in your current system use them. So opening them externally for use in between your transactional cycles is what I mean. Right? Upside is the owner of the system knows best about what they're doing. They can facilitate. An example would be bulk data imports to their system, right? Um, and downside, multiple teams, multiple all the things which come out with multiple team coordination, and again, fresh consolidation would require rallying up those teams and start talking about this stuff, right? But the bigger problem, what I've seen there is consistency issues, right? So a team comes in and says like, okay, this is the way I design my internal APIs, and the other team might have like a different like approach altogether. There are some mitigation steps where you would see the team going in and looking at, okay, these are our standard API design uh, uh, directions at a company. But again, some way to enforce them really helps a lot and goes a long way. So those things have to be kept in mind if you start going for this approach. Okay. So if I have to pick a winner, that would be red pill scenario, of course. But again, as in software, the solution can, or for more or less for any reason, can be depends. And I'll go more about why, right? So this is purely now me looking at sort of the scenarios or like the way we have done tens of like, again, at least not if a couple like more than 10 migrations or so, is having a dedicated team, more like a DevOps team of sort, right? So a team with like different areas of expertise who can come in and work across the breadth of the company, right? So they can create a good onboarding experience for other companies who are being absorbed into the business. So, like again, the clients here are different businesses which are coming in. This can also be a very much like a leeway for external APIs how we create it, but it's more again internally for a very different set focus, a subset of APIs which we are creating, right? So, but in conjunction to this, one very important point which you need to know is about the architecture model which you propose here, right? So what you need is consistency or standardization around connectors. I did mention this in the previous the Bluebill scenario also, where like individual teams were responsible. What you do need to look at is, if you look at it in the architecture terms, like a connector scenario is what fits best. But what you need with that is like the API interfaces should be consistent, and that can be much more easier with a single team managing the whole front API which is fronting it. So I think that's what's more important here when you start looking at such a team being built and such a team actually looking at all the APIs which are to be supported for internal clients. Okay, how the DevOps team or a dedicated team looks like. That's one example to go with. All right. So I think over time, what me and some of my colleagues have done is given it a name, or in terms of like more back-channel APIs. And if we look at what this really means for us is internal APIs of sort, which are specifically designed for migration use cases, provide standardized connectors for team to onboard new businesses onto existing company stack, right? Simple definition for like any of the APIs which can serve internal clients to be absorbed into our existing systems is what backchannel APIs refer to, right? And they have to have a set purpose. So these teams are small. It's very easy to overwhelm them. So what you really want to start with is you actually start with a core set of features. And I say core set of features, these are the must-haves for your company or for your org or for your business to say like, okay, without these, the consolidation essentially is a failure for us, right? Or a migration is essentially a failure for us. You cannot use this new functionality, or you cannot use that existing functionality from that other company if this does not happen. Things like those. So you find those core features, you start making API extensions or standalone APIs as need be for handling such features, right? Then we jump on to standardizing interface or connectors, right? Then we start looking at standardizing mappings. Hey, when I ask for user, I need a GUID of this format. This is sort of the character length or whatnot. Or I need a description which is to be minimum this, maximum that. So all these standardizations, mapping formats should be laid out up front for your APIs as cleanly as possible, involving the business so that they can understand what you mean by your API interfaces. That I've historically seen helps a lot to make to clarify and all to make it easier to understand for anyone to say, hey, if I need to import users, here's the system which we can use. Here's the API. Open API spec has been great. You can again generate all sort of SDKs and whatnot with that. So take a look. But these things do help. And then it's an evolving sort of life cycle, right? Sorry, a cycle for us essentially, because you never kind of have a fixed set of core features. You develop API and you are done. You're sort of never done. You reassess every time when the company grows, or you build out new feature sets which are more kind of helping the customers or a greater product market fit. All of those scenarios, you reassess and say, okay, we'll expand or we include these features, we drop certain features, and that cycle sort of repeats. So this is core to it, where you want to keep it manageable. It's an internal API. You can delete stuff, you can deprecate stuff. Nobody else is kind of going to depend on it. Once a migration finishes, that is essentially gone. So that's good part about it, where you don't have to kind of keep an additive API in terms of versioning if you start looking at it, right? Okay, so I think as we started upfront in our slides, we go again 1 to 2 levels deep, and then we just come back up. So this is my last more, I think, content heavy or dense slide, which I want to call it. So I just want to give you a flavor of system structuring, right? I think this is a bigger concept which I cannot explore in like last couple of minutes here, but what I do want to talk about is the diagram on the right. We start with where I think for this is for illustration purposes. Ignore the bulk API or the controller logo. But what this talks about is, if you look at number one, a single controller is, and sort of an ideal scenario where you have a dedicated team developing this single sort of API facade for you for all the different business logic or services or teams or whatever you have, and then kind of providing this for a business which is being onboarded or migrated, right? Approach two is somewhere in the middle. What you usually, or what I've usually seen at companies, is where you have uh, every company having their, sorry, every uh, org having their own sort of interface, or every business part having their own interface. So users or like order management system will have their own interfaces, and we kind of stitch them together. So again, graphical sort of is a good example, but again, in this case, we are stitching it for a totally different purpose. So the API facade which is coming in is not just skinty, but it does a lot more functionality to cater to migration use cases, right? Which can be like a lot of data and whatnot. Third approach, which you're talking about, is more for a mature company use case, I would say, where you see, hey, every part of the org has already taken into consideration such use cases where they have like internal use cases where there might be bulk data, there might be different set of data coming in all together. It's not just about one single lane of transactional system or one single lane of like the paths which we follow on our website, let's say, or mobile. So in those cases, the job becomes a lot easier. You're just pretty much kind of having a gateway which is routing requests to the right party, and that takes care of it. Sort of in a way what Blue Pill does, but it's already sort of done for you. So that's where I think if you have a lot of these happening, a mature business in this format can really provide you dividends overall. Also, coming into close, we start kind of coming back from all these dense system discussions. Is there is no silver bullet to all of this, right? Again, having dedicated backchannel APIs deserves your attention. Start taking a look. Deserves more love, actually, to be talked about. I've not seen many people kind of come up with these discussions, but again, this is sort of a necessary part of the business, as what I see it, and has helped me tremendously in doing migrations with consistent velocity, with predictable timelines and all of it. All right, folks. I think with that, I would close. You can reach me for any questions at Nitish AGAR, most places, I think, or Nitish.Agarwal at LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitish. That was impressive. And well, our time is up now. We're going for a coffee break. We wanted to thank you on behalf of all the team, and we hope to have you here in a future event. So
Thank you so much again, Mariano.
a nice day, and see you another time. Thank you, everybody. We're going for a coffee break, and we will be back at 3:20. Thank you.